Hey, how are you doing, everybody, and welcome into the SFS channel here on a Tuesday morning, officially getting into Week 14 action. Today, what I've got for you in this video is we're talking 5 wide receivers I think have the upside to be difference-making players in the outcomes of your fantasy leagues. These are players that have come on strong here over the last, whether it's been the entirety of this season, the last month, whatever the case might be. I love the upside, I love the potential, and I love what these guys mean to fantasy rosters right now. So, 5 wide receivers, league-winning upside. Hit the intro. Let's get started. All right, here we go with today's episode. Super excited to kick things off here after another big performance from Elijah Moore. If you've been watching the channel, you know I've basically been an Elijah Moore fanboy the entire year. I absolutely love what this guy is capable of doing. I think he's the most explosive player in this Jets offense. I think he can be a very, very good wide receiver in this league. Long term, in the overall broad perspective of what his career could be for this team, I think he could be a centerpiece for this Jets team. So I'm super excited here in year one that he's been one of the wide receivers that's been producing better than some other names that we really like this season, like a Rashad Bateman per se, who has been, honestly, might have more talent and more overall upside, but just isn't in the right offense right now and isn't able to overtake Marquise Brown for the number one role in his offense. Not that that should be an expectation for a rookie receiver. Just kind of talking about how Elijah Moore, in spite of the obstacles of being a year one wide receiver, being in a poor offense overall, playing with a rookie quarterback who has been prone to make mistakes, he's overcome that, and he has produced in spite of that. What you love to see is that Zach Wilson was the quarterback under center in this Week 13 matchup against an Eagles defense that has been awfully stingy against the pass throughout the season, namely because Darius Slay has been absolutely shut down for most of the year. Elijah Moore, again, did produce in spite of that with Zach Wilson under center, which has been something that hasn't always been the case. We've seen Joe Flacco come out here, put up 2 really nice games for Elijah Moore. We've seen Mike White produce quality numbers for Elijah Moore. We've seen, I forget the third-string quarterback who even came in for a time during the Josh Johnson, who came in. We had, 3 quarterbacks play when Mike White got injured in Thursday Night Football against the Colts all those weeks ago. Besides the point here, this is a special talent. This is a very impressive player. And when you have the body of work, the lack of effect that he is showing from quarterback play, that is really, that is a momentous collection of outputs for a fantasy player. So I love the idea of what Elijah Moore can continue to do this season. 16 points against the Eagles this past week on 6 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown, as well as 12 targets, which is a career high for Moore. He just keeps trending up, and the consistency dating back his last 6 out of 7 games back to Week 7 have all been 8.5 or more fantasy points in half PPR scoring. The production is there. The usage is now there. The volume is stacking upon itself and increasing as we get down the stretch of this season. And he's got 6 touchdowns in his last 7 games total. He does have a rushing touchdown tossed in there as well. So I love everything about this situation. I absolutely think he can finish this year as the number one wideout on this Jets roster. I think at this point he has really surpassed Corey Davis for being the most favored offensive weapon in this passing game. Elijah Moore, I can't say enough about him. I think the upside he has as a potential lineup flex is great for what he could be the rest of the year for teams. One more quick note on Elijah Moore. While he is, in my eyes, or while he was surpassing Corey Davis in this offense as the top wide receiver for the rest of this season, he is now quite literally being thrust into the top position for this Jets offense as Corey Davis is out for the year with core muscle surgery that he'll be having. So while Corey's been in and out of the lineup as of late and struggling to stay on the field, and I think in spite of that, Elijah Moore has stepped up to the plate and started to shine in his absence. Now Elijah Moore, the rest of the way, will truly be the top option in this offense, and I think that will do all the better for him in the future. Diontae Johnson moving into this next player here, probably the biggest name on the list for today, but he is having such a quietly dominant season at the fantasy wide receiver position. The consistency he provides on a week in, week out basis, in addition to the occasional ceiling output that he provides, is just fantastic. Now, he's not having a Cooper Kupp level season where every game seems to be 10 plus targets and these ridiculous fantasy totals, scoring touchdowns almost every week. But Diontae is one of the next best things, not in terms of overall point output, but the floor level is almost unprecedented for what we see out of receivers in the fantasy football climate right now. Keenan Allen's another name who's very similar in terms of we think of him as a very steady floor play because of the weekly target volume he gets and the yardage he's able to produce with those looks ultimately. But man, Diontae has been such a sight to see this year. Against Baltimore, he had one of those ceiling outputs. That stop route, if you guys know what I'm talking about, on the goal line for the go-ahead touchdown against Baltimore was just excellent route running. It was fantastic footwork at its finest. He is as close of a wide receiver to the body type, the route running, the ability of Antonio Brown that they've had since he departed. Now, I'm not saying Diontae Johnson is Antonio Brown at the peak of AB's game, but Diontae Johnson is a dang good wide receiver. He can do it all. We've said this probably 100 times this season. Short level routes, intermediate route running, deep balls. He can win basically every situation he's faced with out on the football field. He's coming off 4 hot games of 80 or more receiving yards, and he's got 9 double-digit target contests on the season. So he's getting a tremendous level of volume almost every game. Minnesota, Tennessee, Kansas City, those are going to be pass-happy games coming up here. Cleveland, and then Baltimore in Week 18. If you're one of those unique situations where your fantasy season goes all the way until a Week 18 contest, Diontae Johnson's going to get another juicy matchup against a secondary that's been decimated with injuries all year, and now just lost Marlon Humphrey to a pec injury, which is going to keep him out the rest of this season. So Diontae Johnson, fantastic floor. He'll give you that occasional pop and ceiling performance as well. Can't say enough about him. I wish I would have talked about him more this year because of how much we loved him in the draft process and how much he is so valuable to this offense. He's a great player, is going to continue to do great things down the stretch. I like the opportunity for him to not only keep these floor contests going, but also give you guys those boosted boom production ceilings as well. Jaylen Waddle for the Miami Dolphins, another very impressive rookie receiver. We've got one more on today's episode. Jaylen Waddle has done worlds of work for this Dolphins passing game the last very long chunk of the season. The last month or 5 weeks in particular, he is way ahead of Jamar Chase in terms of total fantasy point output. He has been the more reliable, more consistent fantasy option throughout that stretch of games. And Jaylen Waddle is doing so because of the target volume he's seeing underneath, the explosiveness he has after the catch, and something as of late that I'm loving to see factored into this offense is the vertical passing game heading Jaylen Waddle's direction. Now, he hasn't been able to cash in overly large increments throughout this season. He's been fairly quiet in terms of his field stretching ability this year, but we are starting to see Tua throw up some balls a little bit more often to him and give him 1 or 2 chances on a per game basis to come down with one of those. He was able to, and it was the play he actually got a little bit nicked up on this past week. He jumped up, came down with the football, and then it actually got punched out. He was able to recover it, though. Long story. If you saw the play, you know what I'm talking about, but if not, that's fine. He's been playing great, though. Back to Week 6 is the exact date that he really started to have his breakout this season. He's got 11.5 fantasy points in half PPR scoring in 6 out of 8 games since that point in time. That's a 75% success rate of having double-digit fantasy points. It's an excellent marker to be at. And he's cracked 20 fantasy points in 2 of those contests, so that's a very high ceiling to be at. He's showing you that he can not only produce floor numbers, but he can have that occasional boom as well. Big things to look at here as we get down the stretch of the season. Those guys that can give you those extra points, that can get you to that 15, 16, 17, 20-point increments, that's what's going to win you games down the stretch here. And when you can find these type of players that are giving you the consistent floor and that you can already know you're depending upon and to not be a boom or bust asset, these are the guys that are difference makers. It's the same thing with Diontae Johnson we just talked about. So, and then the other thing I love to see is that he's only got 4 total touchdowns since Week 6. That means he's getting his work done and his production accumulated in non-touchdown dependent ways. That's showing you that touchdowns are more of a cherry on top than they are the backbone for his fantasy point production. So all great things you're seeing here come into a culmination for Jaylen Waddle's fantasy stock this year. Maybe you're not loving him so much in standard leagues because if the yardage output isn't there and the touchdowns aren't there, you're not getting as unreal numbers as you are in PPR, where every time he catches one of those underneath routes, you're getting free fantasy points. However, a lot of us are playing PPR or half PPR leagues, so Jaylen Waddle has certainly been one of the best receivers this season. Ja'Marr Chase, hear me out here. We just talked about how Jaylen Waddle the last 5 weeks has actually been far more impressive than Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr had that costly drop this past week, resulted in an interception, and possibly was the dagger for the Bengals. They were making a run for a while coming back in that game. Then that interception happens. Ja'Marr Chase, Joe Burrow drops it down in the breadbasket, and Ja'Marr just flips it back up to the defensive back. Interception. It could have been a touchdown. He could have walked in the end zone. He's got some burners on himself. He could have scored. Didn't. Obviously, if you watch the game, again, know the play I'm talking about, you know the rest and how that turned out. However, the reason Ja'Marr Chase makes the list for today's episode, and I will also acknowledge a reason he might not be as favorable of an option as a Jaylen Waddle down the stretch and over the course of the duration of this season, is because any given play, Ja'Marr Chase can waltz into the end zone and score 6. The explosiveness he has, the strength that he has to run deep patterns, and his ball tracking skills. Now, obviously, his hands have been a bit of an issue this season, and we saw, particularly in the preseason, that pop up the most. It was quiet for his first half season immense breakout that he had. Now we're starting to see those issues become a little bit more prevalent and to affect his play a little bit more. I'm going to continue to believe in Ja'Marr Chase going forward here. Joe Burrow's a little bit banged up. He's got a pinky finger issue. I think these two will be fine, though. And again, it's that ceiling value that I think a lot of us can sleep on here, that if that pops up in these big games, in these big weeks when he's in your lineups, that ultimately can be the difference maker. Now, a reason you might not like him as much as a Jaylen Waddle or a Diontae Johnson right now is because that floor value is not as much of a constant and has not been such a constant for the last 5 weeks of production. However, if they can just get back to connecting on those deeper strikes, if he can get one of those big plays to start racking up in the box score here, you're going to start seeing those fantasy points stockpile and accumulate over themselves. So it's a bit more risky here with Ja'Marr Chase. It's not as much of a guarantee, but I'm believing in the player. I'm believing in the quarterback and the player's connectivity, their chemistry together, and the fact that they it's not like it's a guaranteed or certain thing that's going to happen, but I'm buying into the fact that I believe these guys will get it right and figure their stuff out before this season ends. And then finally here, another wide receiver that this is mostly upside based here, just like Ja'Marr Chase. There's not much floor value here. However, I'm projecting the possibility of really sky-high numbers and strong finishes to their fantasy seasons. Odell Beckham Jr., OBJ, makes an appearance on this list. Now, this is, again, a little bit more of a hopeful projection than it is a sure thing. But if you have Odell stashed on your roster, you should feel very good about the potential points he could bring to. Basically, you're hoping at this point in time Odell is like your flex play or even your number 2 flex if that's the type of league format you're playing in. The reason I love OBJ here is in his first 2 games as a Ram, you've got 2 touchdowns. So Matt Stafford is making an honest effort to get him the football in the end zone. That's important. He only saw 5 targets this past week, but if you understand the game circumstances and the whooping that the Los Angeles Rams put on the Jacksonville Jaguars, won by 30 points, 37-7 was the final score. They did not have to pass the ball nearly as many times as they did the week prior when they played Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers and were trailing for most of that game. Beckham saw 10 targets in his first game as a Ram, or in his first, I believe he's played 3 games with the Rams. Now you look back, his last 2 games, he does have 2 touchdowns. His first game was against the 49ers. That game was a completely different story. Bad circumstances for the Rams in that game. They got pretty much pushed all over the field for 4 quarters. It was an ugly mess if you tuned into that Sunday night game. However, his past 2 games as a Ram, 2 touchdowns. They're making an honest effort to get him the football. He has a role to fill. He has to step up for this team. They actually need him to put up quality numbers because of the loss of Robert Woods, which is a lot larger than the average fan would realize because of all the things he did for that team. He was the Swiss Army knife, super good blocker, super quality route runner at all 3 levels of the defense. He was a red zone target. Robert Woods could do it all. Odell Beckham Jr. is not the same type of player, but he certainly has a load of talent, and he has the opportunity to be an electric playmaker for this offense and take some of the strain off of Cooper Kupp, who is obviously seeing more and more attention from legitimate teams. The more his numbers go up the rest of the season, and with the immense amount of success he's had to this point in the year. So Beckham's final stretch of games this year, which I love, are Arizona, Seattle, Minnesota, a now weakened Baltimore secondary, and the 49ers. All matchups when I could see Beckham having an over-the-top big play, potentially finding the end zone, and having the ability to put up ceiling numbers. There is not a game left on this schedule that is overly intimidating for me in terms of Beckham's upside. Now, that's not to say OBJ has the safest floor in the world. That's not something I'm saying or putting out there. That's definitely not the case. This is not a player who is a sit-and-forget lineup option or a player that you can pencil in as having a boom production game in all of those contests. However, we'll walk you through that in our weekly must-starts episodes. We'll answer questions in the comment section. But I think there are 5 great opportunities here for Beckham in game scripts, which I expect to be competitive, where he can potentially put out quality numbers, quality output. And if he is your flex option, your 3, 4, 5 wide receiver on your fantasy roster, he could be that difference maker that propels you over the top if he has one of these massive production outputs in one of those crucial games down the stretch of the season. Alright, you guys, those are my 5 potential league-winning wide receivers for this fantasy season. I love the upside with a few guys on the list here. The floors are fantastic as well. So let me know if you've got any of these players down in the comment section below. Let me know how your teams are currently sitting here heading into week 14. And any questions you've got for me, again, I'm happy to get back to as many of you guys as possible. So thank you guys so much for watching. Go check out our other 2 episodes for Fantasy Week 14. And I'll see you there. Peace out.